Flashcards are a great way to memorize facts, but languages, they're not a long list of facts. You have to not only understand what a word means, but you also have to be able to use it yourself. So I personally abandoned flashcards years ago, and in today's video I want to talk about what I do instead. The first thing that I do is I watch things with subtitles. And as I'm watching, if something pops up that I don't know or just something interests me, I'll just pause and look up what the word means. Then I'll just rewind the sentence back and listen to what they say and just repeat it myself before I continue watching whatever it is that I'm watching. It's a great way to find new vocabulary through a real context while also having fun. The next thing that I do is I read as much as I can. I try not to stop and look up every single word as I go, but just the key words that I really need to understand to get the gist of what's going on in what I'm reading. But the really key thing that I do is I particularly take notice of words that seem to keep coming up regularly throughout the text. Or if I notice that there are words that show up in the text that I had previously heard or learned somewhere else, I will also take note like that now, oh okay, it's now showing up here too in this book. I will underline or highlight that word so that anytime I want to, I can flip through that book and find it again. By just taking that little extra pause to stop and underline and really take notice of that word, I find that really helps it stick in my long-term memory. Because I'm not just looking up the word, I'm actually keeping track of how often I'm encountering the word. So if I heard the word somewhere else and then I read it here and I underline it, I'm reminding myself, okay, we've heard it a couple times. And then if I encounter it again in the future, I'll remember like, oh, you know, this is a word I've encountered a couple times before, and I underline it. And all of these little actions of underlining it makes me hyper aware of the fact that I've encountered this word several times, and I find that I end up internalizing that word really fast when I draw a lot of attention to it. Another thing that I do is I also write down a lot of example sentences. Rather than writing a list of words and what they mean, I just write the sentence with the word in that sentence, and I don't even write the meaning of the word down at all. And whenever I have the time or I particularly want to review certain words, I will just go back and find those sentences and then just read them a couple times and practice saying them aloud. I find it really easy to remember the meaning of a word this way because even if I've forgotten the word, if I reread those sentences from the context clues, I can instantly understand what the meaning of the word is. And then through the sentence itself, I can also remember where I encountered this word. Because I can say, oh, like I remember this sentence, it was from that book I was reading. Or, oh, I remember this was from that show that I was watching. I also try to find a way to take one or two words that I've learned recently and immediately try to use them. So while talking with someone or listening to something in a textbook, I might come across something that I don't know. I'm like, oh, okay, like what is that? And I'll look it up and see what it means. But then later I might go and watch a TV show and then realize like, oh, that's the word that I just looked up. Like, oh, it showed up here too. It must be a good word. So then when I go to talk to someone in my target language later, or I have class with a tutor, I try to find a way to work that word into the conversation. Because I find that when I have this word that's like really fresh in my head, in my short-term memory, if I find a way to force that into a conversation somewhere, I end up really solidifying that gap from just knowing it to using it. And lastly, I don't try to cram a ton of vocabulary into my head all at once. Let me give you an example to demonstrate why. Let's say you're going to the grocery store and you only need 4 items. Do you really need to make a grocery list for 4 items? For a lot of people, probably not, because you can easily remember 4 items off the top of your head. But let's say you're planning to have a dinner and you're cooking this really fancy recipe that takes like 10 to 15 ingredients. Now, when you go grocery shopping for those 10 to 15 ingredients, are you gonna go to the store with a pre-made list? Probably, because once that list gets longer and longer, 10, 15, 20 items, it's really difficult for you to remember all of that off the top of your head. And you're going to make a list probably because you're worried that you might forget some of it. Well, it's the same thing with learning vocabulary in another language. If you have this long list of vocabulary words, it's going to be really hard for you to remember them off the top of your head. Whereas if you have a shorter list of vocabulary words, it is much easier for you to recall that off the top of your head and to remember all of those individual words. Now, don't get me wrong, like when I'm studying, I expose myself to so many new words. But the difference is that I'm not trying to turn all of these words I encounter into these giant vocabulary lists that I'm trying to memorize in a very short amount of time. I instead just dwindle it down to a small few that I think are the most important, and then I try to only master that small few. I found that instead, if I approached every time I read something, every time I listened something, with the idea of let me just pick out 1 or 2 really important words from this and only focus on those, using all of the methods that I mentioned in this video up until now, I found that it was really hard for me to forget those words, and I could easily and immediately use them. Now, if you're really interested in learning more about how I build vocabulary in 4 languages, I recommend checking out this video where I talk specifically about how I take all of my passive vocabulary and really work it into active vocabulary.